Chapter 51. Father scolded me again today. He told me I am to have nothing more to do with researching ancient technology. Link read the words, struggling to make some of them out in the light of his campfire. This page had been damaged by his fall in the castle moat, and certain parts of it, especially further down, were illegible. But he could make out the parts that he wanted to read. Earlier, his memory had been sparked, like remembering a scene from a dream, yet it slipped through his fingers as he spent time with Ronson digging out some of her belongings. He tried to remember it now, but little came to mind, other than a vague sense of frustration. But he remembered what had triggered it, which is what drove him to pulling out Zelda's diary. He'd already tried asking Zelda, but she hadn't responded. His hope of being able to speak to her whenever he pleased was, unfortunately, not quite a reality yet. But he hoped to be able to reach her more often than before. He insisted that I focus instead on training that will help me awaken my sealing magic. I was so frustrated and ashamed, I could not even speak. He'd read this passage before, but had passed it by without much thought, partially due to the fact that it was so difficult to make out, and also because it made no mention of him. He assumed that it held no memories for him. Now he wasn't so sure. I've been training since I was a child, and yet Mother passed the year before my training was to begin. In losing her, I lost not just a mother, but a teacher. He could remember that very conversation with Zelda in the gardens. The pain and frustration she'd felt caused an ache within his heart that he didn't recall feeling when first reading through this. Of course, he hadn't remembered that particular memory at the time. Mother used to smile and tell me, "Zelda, all will be well in the end. You can do anything." But she was wrong. No matter how I try or much time passes, this power that is my birthright evades me. Here, several of the letters and words became illegible, the ink having run or the page damaged. Tomorrow, I journey with K to the spring of were to train, but this too will end in fail, such as curse. He could remember the spring of power in vivid detail now. That memory stood out starkly in his mind. He can even remember some of his journey there with her. Vaguely, he recalled waiting out a storm under the boughs of a tree. He looked back to the opening passages of the diary entry. This one held answers for him. He was sure of it. Her father had been angry with her, just like Ronson's mother had been angry. Wasn't it? They were both angry because their daughters weren't pursuing the paths they intended for them. You were investigating something. A shrine? No, that was another memory unrelated. Something Sheikah related. Something... An image appeared in his head. A guardian? That felt right. Zelda had been investigating. No, observing a guardian, and another image appeared. A bridge. He recognized that bridge. The one that led to her tower from her bedroom. Zelda had... She invited me into her study. That's right. Memory began to bloom in his mind. She'd wanted to share something with him, and found him in the kitchens, practically ordering him to go with her. Link smiled, remembering her insistence. He'd been hungry, damn it. But she informed him that she would have servants bring them up a meal. More memories appeared in his mind, More images, more thoughts and emotions. More her. And then finally the window into his past opened yet again, and he remembered. You know, Princess, the cooks were almost finished with the evening meal, Link said, following along in Zelda's hurried wake. She walked purposely in front of him, her waist-length hair swaying with every step. Just a few more minutes and we could have had supper. Do you ever think about anything except your stomach? She asked, glancing over her shoulder at him. Yes, he said in a clipped tone. But he was famished, damn it. But when it is so close to supper, I do tend to get hungry. She waved a hand, smiling in that self-satisfied manner. I'll have one of the servants bring some up to us. Will that suffice? He perked up slightly at that suggestion. Now, rather than eating supper in the dining hall, or even in the kitchen alcove, he had a private meal with Zelda to look forward to. That did sound better, he was willing to admit. Not that he was willing to give her the satisfaction. She took far too much at his expense as it was. I suppose. She snorted. Oh, you suppose? They passed by a pair of maids, who watched them far too curiously for Link's comfort. He needed to be more circumspect. He was treating her too familiarly, for being in the middle of the halls. Already the kitchen scullions would probably be whispering about their impromptu meeting. He cleared his throat and fell silent, standing in a little taller, and trying to look more knightly. Zelda glanced back at him, expression showing mild irritation, but she didn't press the banter between them. The week since their trip into the lab with Arl had been difficult for her, he knew. Even worse when he'd made his own trip out to Zora's domain alone. But Mipha had requested that he visit, and had mentioned the problems with the Lizalfos, so he'd felt he needed to go. Not that he disliked visiting her. It had been a nice trip. Less tension. Someone he could be a friend with, and not worry so much about inappropriate feelings regarding the particular shade of her eyes, or the shape of her, well, everything. Mipha had acted somewhat oddly, though. Very reminiscent, wistful, even. It made him think, but no matter. At least Zelda's time cooped up in the castle would soon be coming to an end. They would set off for the Akala tomorrow, to visit the Spring of Power. Link looked forward to the trip, as he knew Zelda did. He longed for the nights spent under the stars. She reached her bedroom and Zelda produced a key, unlocking her door. Link felt a sudden flush pass over his face, and glanced around to see some servants looking towards them. Princess? She paused, looking back at him with a raised eyebrow, and then a look of recognition appeared. Oh, right. She looked over at the two servants. Send down to the kitchens, and have them prepare 2 evening meals, and have them brought up to my quarters. Sir Link and I shall be dining in here this evening. Yes, Your Highness, one of the maids said, bowing low, and then she and her companion both scampered off to do as told. Link sighed softly. Zelda looked back at him, frowning. What? It's nothing. No. What? He pursed his lips and glanced around again. I've just heard rumors as of late. About you and I. A pink flush appeared on Zelda's cheeks, and her expression grew carefully controlled. Oh? And what do those rumors say? That you and I spend a great deal of time together alone. You are my personal knight. It is only natural that we should spend time in each other's presence. Alone in your quarters? Her cheeks grew a deeper shade of pink. We are not spending time in my quarters, precisely. We will be in my study. We simply will pass through my quarters to reach it because I don't feel like walking all the way down the hall to the stairs. I know, but I worry that we have been acting too familiarly as of late. She frowned. Oh, would it be better if... Would you prefer not to come with me then? Oh, Zelda, he thought. You surely have no idea. Of course not. Link glanced around, then leaned a little closer, acting more conspiratorially. You just need to command me around a little more. Maybe glare at me every once in a while. She blinked in surprise and then a smile passed over her lips. Of course. Well, you have been complaining a great deal lately. She placed her hands on her hips, giving an almost convincing glare. I won't have any more of your lazing about, Sir Link. Lazing about? Yes, lazing. Honestly, what if I had been in danger while you were off gallivanting about in the kitchens? Probably flirting with the scullion maids. Again. Again? What? I don't want to hear any of your simple-minded excuses. You are my knight, and you shall do what I say. Is that understood? She's far too into this, Link thought, raising an eyebrow. Zelda's smile disappeared, replaced by a stern look. He cleared his throat. Yes, Your Highness. He bowed low. Good. Now, please. She paused, considering. No, I order you to enter my quarters. Yes, that sounds perfectly convincing, Link said wryly. Reasonable, even. She shoved a finger under his nose. No complaining. You will march yourself into my room and up to my study, where we shall discuss my new theories. Link chuckled. He couldn't help himself. Somewhere you went from insufferable noblewoman to stern nursemaid. She snorted with stifled laughter, grinning. I did, didn't I? It's all right. I'm sure you gave the rats something to gossip about. She scoffed as she opened her bedroom door. Don't be absurd. I don't have rats up here. The keys might be chattering amongst themselves, though. He followed her into her bedroom and she closed the door behind her. The room was large and round, with a large four-poster bed with lacy white hangings on one side. She had an ornate dresser and a dressing curtain in the corner. A large fireplace was set into the opposite wall, and a golden bow hung above it, the bow that Zelda had admitted to him she had little experience actually using. Lately, Link had been considering giving her some lessons. In the center of the room was her small tea table, facing towards the two large windows between the spiral staircase that led up to the second floor and the bridge that led to her study. Honestly, servants are always so gossipy, she said as she crossed the room towards the staircase, sticking their noses in where they don't belong. It's kind of a pastime. Squires are the same way. Hell, knights are the same way. Their gossip just tends to result in someone issuing a challenge for a duel, if they aren't careful. Men. I will have you know that Eleanor has challenged and defeated at least 3 other knights this year alone. Zelda looked back at him with a quirked eyebrow. And that is something to be admired. The fact that she is good at hitting things with a stick. I imagine that she has suitors lining up to ask for her hand. That isn't what we were just talking about. Link followed after her, beginning up the stairs behind her. Besides, I'm not convinced Eleanor has any intention on marrying. A man, at least. She gasped suddenly, looking back at him. He stopped short. What? I didn't mean that as a... You do it too, she said, grinning. You're gossiping. That... No. She snorted. Yes, you are. Sir Link, the court gossip. Who knew? I wasn't gossiping, I was answering your questions. I never asked you about her preference in men or women, Link. He paused, frowning. Damn, you're right. That's the last time I go for drinks with Frederick. He'd been trying to be more sociable, as of late, due to Zelda's insistence. She smiled triumphantly and continued up the stairs. He watched her for a moment and then shook himself, following quickly. They spent the next 2 hours in her study. At one point, servants did arrive with their meal, which was a flavorful stew full of meats and vegetables, and they ate it standing outside on the bridge connecting to her tower, the porcelain bowls set on the merlons. It was a distinctly pleasant meal. Zelda was clearly in good cheer, as was he, with the anticipation of leaving the castle the following day. As the hours passed, they eventually left the cramped confines of the study again, walking out onto the bridge to talk and watch the sunset. They were out in the open, which did make Link somewhat uncomfortable, but there weren't many people around, and no one could hear them from this distance at least. Below them in the courtyard, one of the large guardians sat. Lately, more of the machines had been exhumed from underneath the castle, repaired and in working order. Whatever issues that the scientists had early on in their weaponry had been resolved, and now they were, more and more, being used as sentries, He didn't trust them very much, not after that first one had nearly killed Zelda. And him, for that matter. But she certainly enjoyed seeing them. She leaned over the crenellation to get a better look at the guardian below. A pair of Sheikah scientists had approached it, and did something to make it suddenly come to life, its 6 legs shifting and it standing up. Incredible. Zelda smiled back at him, before looking at the guardian below. We're at a point now that we can actually control them. He stepped up beside her, leaning against the Merlon, and watching the guardian warily. The Sheikah appeared to be conducting some kind of experiments below. The guardian followed one of the Sheikah almost like a puppy, walking when she walked and stopped when she stopped. The other Sheikah jotted notes down in a book. At the current rate, we'll soon know all we need to know about the guardians and the divine beasts. She turned to face him, her expression growing firm, confident. And should Calamity Ganon ever show itself again, we will be well positioned to defend ourselves. It made him happy to see her feeling confident in anything regarding Ganon, though he still worried. Would he be ready? He opened his mouth to speak, but then another voice joined them. What are you doing out here, Zelda? She gasped and whirled, and Link's eyes traveled from her face to the man walking across the bridge toward them. Roam, Bosphorus, Hyrule. The king. He had been joined by at least 2 royal guards, who moved into place, standing at attention on either side of the walkway. Link's eyes widened, and the first thought that popped into his head was about the rumors that he'd spoken of earlier. But no, those wouldn't reach the king's ears, would they? He forced those thoughts away and knelt on the ground, his forearm resting on his knee, and bowed his head. Zelda said hesitantly. He glanced up just slightly to see Zelda's hand fall to her side. After a moment of hesitation, she took a deep breath and clenched that hand into a fist. I was assessing the results of the experiment with the Guardians. When the king said nothing, she pressed on, taking a step towards him. These pieces of ancient technology should prove quite useful in the— I know that. Rome's voice cut across hers, soft yet full of royal authority. They are essential to the kingdom's future, and our research demands that we keep a close eye on them. Yes, that, Zelda began, but then her father continued again, voice growing stronger. However, as the princess, you currently have a crucial, unfulfilled responsibility to your kingdom. Link felt ice run through his veins. What? Surely he won't have this discussion here. Not with me here. Not with those guards behind him. Let me ask you once more. The king's voice grew even sterner, angry. When will you stop treating this as some sort of childish game? Link felt heat rising up his neck, on the tips of his ears. A game? He thinks she's playing a game? Fury boiled up within him, an emotion that both surprised and concerned him. Such feeling should not be directed towards the king, certainly not by one of the knights. Zelda took a half step back, releasing a shaky breath. When she spoke, he could hear a tremor in her voice as she struggled to keep her emotions under control. I'm doing everything I can. I just returned from the Spring of Courage, where I offered every ounce of my prayers to the goddess. And tomorrow and now you are here, wasting your time. You need to be dedicating every moment you have to your training. The king's voice grew stronger still, louder. Loud enough that those below might even be able to hear him. You must be single-minded in unlocking that power that will seal Calamity Ganon away. Please, Link silently pled, please don't do this to her. He feared what would come next. I already am, Zelda said, voice quivering. Don't you see there's nothing more that I can do? My hope is that you'll allow me to contribute here in whatever way I can. What time is it? What? I asked you. What time is it? Zelda hesitated, glancing at the sky. At the position of the sun, she stiffened. Link did as well. Her evening prayers. She had missed them. She looked back at her father. I merely... No more excuses, Zelda. Rowan paused, taking a breath and calming his voice some. Stop running away from your duty. As the king, I forbid you to have anything to do with these machines from this moment on, and command you to focus on your training. Zelda's body went rigid, and her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. From his vantage, he could see her chin quiver as she tried to find something to say. The king, however, was not finished with his bitter words. Do you know how the gossip mongers refer to you? He asked, turning from her and looking down towards the Guardian. They are out there at this moment, whispering amongst themselves. Link braced himself for a moment he feared, the moment that he and Zelda would be separated due to their close bond, their friendship. But that did not come. Instead, it was far worse. They whisper that you are an heir to a throne of nothing. Nothing but failure. Zelda released a soft sound. Barely more than a whimper. It was nearly enough to push him over the edge. To rise, to take his rightful place between her and this person that would cause her such pain. He almost did. His hands clenched into fists, and the muscles in his legs tightened, preparing to spring. But duty held him fast. The king's voice softened. It is woven into your destiny that you prove them wrong. He turned back to face her. Behind him, the two guards that attended him stood stoically, their faces expressionless. They would likely tell their fellows of this encounter before the hour was up. Do you understand? Zelda lowered her head, her hands folding together in front of her. Yes, she said, barely more than a whisper. I understand. The king watched her for another moment, and then his eyes traveled to where Link kneeled. He quickly lowered his head again. After a moment, he heard the king turn. He risked another glance, watching as the king walked away, seemingly oblivious to the crushing blow that he had just delivered to his daughter. After he departed, only silence remained. Zelda stood still, hands folded before her. He slowly stood, taking a step closer. Once up close, he could see her face. Tears streaked her cheeks, and she barred her teeth in an effort to keep her emotions from pouring over. She trembled. Link hesitantly reached out, his fingertips barely brushing her shoulder. Her eyes snapped open, and she backed away, shaking her head. I must go. My prayers. Zelda. I cannot believe that I missed my prayers. I never. Zelda! He stepped in front of her, blocking her path. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Her lips quivered, and he thought that she might break then and start weeping. But she didn't. I must go. She brushed past him, and he heard her rapid footsteps as she descended her spiral staircase down to her bedroom. He was left standing there, alone. Below, the Guardian's head swiveled slowly, and he could have sworn that its blue eye focused on him. Link slowly closed the diary. The page containing the smeared words had been torn, a jagged rip appearing in the first several lines of tightly written text. He couldn't remember doing that. He set the book aside and stared into the fire's depths. He remained like that well into the night.